We are going to get going here with Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District CIP Technical Information Webinar. I'm Amanda Wegner with the Sewer District. I will be coming back at the end of our presentation today to just give a little bit of information, but I am going to turn it over for now to Eric Dundee, our Executive Director, to get us started.
Thanks, Amanda. Once again, yep, I'm Eric Dundee, Executive Director of the Madison Metropolitan Sewage District, and welcoming you to this webinar. As a note, this webinar is the first of its kind for the district, and it's meant to be a technical review of the highlighted treatment plant and collection system work for 2026 and early 2027. So a few notes about the webinar today. The project presentations don't specifically cover the budget or financing. This is just the projects themselves that we're planning, designing, and constructing. Also note that this presentation is going to be delivered as an informational webinar format. So that means no questions will be taken during the sessions, but Amanda will come back at the end and there'll be information about where to send questions after that. As we move forward, here's the projects for the agenda that we're planning to highlight today. This is a mix of our large major projects to even some of our smaller projects that may or may not impact some of our customer communities. With that, this list is based off the 2025 CIP, so Capital Improvement Plan. We'll highlight these projects, but then we're currently in the process of developing the 2026 CIP. So note that there will be only a few new projects added for 2026 and through 2031, because as you can tell, the list is already full. So with that, introduce the people that will be presenting today.
Just really quick, do we have presentation mode up?
We do. Yep, we need the slideshow.
Well, that's interesting. It should be up. Try that again.
There we go.
Okay, right. Sorry about that, everyone. And are you seeing it in full screen?
Yes.
Great. There we go.
Perfect. Okay, so the webinar, is presented by the staff you see here. Myself, I'm just providing the opening, and then we'll have Todd Giebert, our capital planning manager, and Jen Hurlebus, capital planning engineer, speak. And then Lisa Coleman, director of engineering, Alan Grooms, operations manager, and Eric Rare, maintenance and reliability manager, will get into some of the specifics on some of the detailed projects we're in. So with that, knowing we only have 90 minutes, I'm going to turn it over to each one of these presenters. And in about 5 or 10 minutes per project, you'll hear the technical details. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Todd Giebert. As Eric mentioned, the purpose of today's webinar is really to talk about the technical aspects of each project. But I want to take just a few minutes here and talk about some of the planning aspects of these projects and what went into preparing our capital improvements plan. To begin with, then, I'd like to just talk about a few facts of our service area for those who may not be familiar with the district or what we do here. So really, basically, we have 24 customer communities in the greater Madison area that we serve, and they vary widely in size, from as small as 3 homes is a sanitary district, up to our largest customer, which is the city, Madison, and they contribute about 2/3 of our flow. Our service area is about 190 square miles, and we get about 37 million gallons of flow to the plant each day. Although this time of year, with the wetter weather, that number is more like 42 million gallons per day. Throughout today's presentation, you'll hear a lot. And could you go back to the previous slide, please? Thanks. You'll hear a lot of talk about collection system projects and treatment plant projects, and both are depicted on the slide here. For our collection system, we have about 100 miles of interceptors. And the basic operation is that interceptors drain to our pump stations, of which we have 18. Those pump stations pump into forest mains and pressurize flow, lift the wastewater up to where it can flow by gravity again. And that process for customers that are located further away from the plant, like Wanakee and DeForest, can happen up to 4 times. It is a valuable system. We estimate the assets are valued at around $2 billion. But it is an aging system as well. The district was founded in 1930, but some of our assets are already over 100 years old. Next slide, please. So given those needs, the age of our system, the scope of our capital improvements plan has increased in the last 5 or 6 years. And here you see the project drivers that we listed in our 2025 CIP. So this would cover the years 2025 to 2031. Among the primary drivers for each project based on cost, about 2/3 of the projects that we are undertaking are being done to address condition needs. The remaining third is mainly to provide additional capacity either in the collection system or at the treatment plant. And not surprising, if you look at the map up in the upper right-hand corner, Dane County has some of the fastest growth of any county in the state, according to the state of Wisconsin over the last 4 years. By total population alone, it's first, and by percentage increase, it's second. So we continue to add projects to increase capacity and support growth in the greater Madison area. On a lesser scale, project drivers, regulatory, and resilience, we have very few projects that have those as the primary driver. Next slide. So next, I want to talk a little bit about how we plan and prioritize projects in the CIP. And so this is just a very basic diagram of our planning process and how projects feed into our capital improvements plan. At the very top is master planning, which has a very long time horizon, or can have a long time horizon, up to 50 years. So our last 50-year master plan was done in 2009, and this looked at very long range or strategic objectives for the district. Things like, should we continue to convey all the wastewater here to the Nine Springs plant at a central location, or build satellite treatment plants around our service area? Other issues that were explored were balancing watershed balance and also reusing effluent from the plant. But very rarely do projects from the master planning process lead directly into the capital improvements plan. Where most of our projects come from is facility planning, which, as you can see here, has a much smaller time horizon, usually 20 years. And this is where most of our planning work takes place. Most of our projects do involve some component of facilities planning. For smaller projects, it can be done concurrent with design and can take maybe 2 to 3 months. For larger projects, the treatment plant, this is a distinct planning step that takes up to 1 year and possibly 2 years to complete. One thing that we are noticing in that past is that large plant expansions and other things were done, required facility planning, but now we're finding that condition assessment is becoming a bigger factor. We're doing facility planning to address the aging infrastructure, which is leading to more projects in our capital improvements plan. Next slide. Just a few more notes about facility planning. There's really 3 distinct steps to facility planning. The first is you have to identify a problem or a need. And as part of that, you're assessing the condition of your assets. The second step is to develop alternatives to address that problem. And then the third and final step is usually identifying the most cost-effective alternative over the life of the asset, using both economic and non-economic factors. For most projects, or a lot of projects, this is a statutory requirement that the DNR requires, and it's a very detailed process in their codes. And a final note on facility planning, the district uses a lot of clean water fund loans to finance bigger projects, and that the DNR requires that facility plans be used for that process. So by default, the district does use facility planning for most of its larger projects. Next slide. So with that, I'd like to get into one of our large facility planning projects that we just kicked off. You can see it started last month. And this is for our we call it our Biosolids facilities plan. basically the operation of the plant separates solids from the liquid stream. The liquid stream gets treated, disinfected, and returned to streams miles downstream of the plant. The biosolids go through a completely different process. They are thickened, digested, dewatered some more, and stored temporarily at the plant, and then taken off site. Until about 1980, we actually stored biosolids at the plant in lagoons just across the road. But that turned out to not be a sustainable practice. So about that time, we developed a program called MetroGo, where we temporarily store the biosolids at the plant and then take them to local farm fields as a liquid fertilizer. That process has worked great over the last 45 years or so, but there are some challenges that are developing. So this plan will look at how we address those challenges in the next 20 to 25 years. Next slide. So to say a little more about those challenges, you see here the slide, actually what our storage tanks looks like. We have 3 large tanks that each hold about 6 to 7 million gallons of biosolids or sludge. And then during the spring and fall months, during very short windows, we take those biosolids in tanker trailers out to local farm fields where they are put into the soil and used as a fertilizer. Again, this works very well, but there are challenges that are developing. The biggest one is probably storage capacity. Over the years, we are generating more and more biosolids, which is using up that excess capacity in these tanks. A related problem is that weather patterns are changing. We have less and less time to take those biosolids out to the fields due to the wet weather that we often see in the spring. Just a couple of years ago, we actually ran out of capacity and had to provide temporary capacity at a substantial cost. So that is becoming a more prevalent problem. Another challenge is availability of farmland. As Madison continues to urbanize, there's less farmland available to spread the biosolids on. We also have to be mindful that our biosolids are rich in nutrients, and we don't want to over apply those nutrients on the same land. So we have to allow enough time between applications. As we find new farmland, we also are hauling longer and longer distances, which takes away from the time we can haul and also comes at a greater cost. And then the final challenge is related to new contaminants that we're seeing. I'm sure everyone has heard a lot about the forever chemicals, PFAS, that is both in our raw wastewater and our biosolids. So we have to be mindful of that challenge as we move forward. Next slide. So some of the things that our consultant will look at during their alternatives analysis for this project. We think that we will continue to land apply biosolids going forward. So one option is, can we optimize and expand the current system, likely by providing additional storage tanks and improving our ability to get the biosolids away from the plant. We'll also be looking at the different processes that we use to produce biosolids. Every aspect of the process, the thickening, digestion facilities, mixing and heating of the digesters will be looked at to make sure we're doing things in the most cost-efficient way and reducing complexity where possible. A big component of the study will be, can we reduce the volume of our biosolids? Right now, the sludge actually flows like a liquid. It's only 5% solid. So we do have technologies already at the plant, such as those centrifuge that you see at the bottom right, where we can thicken those solids to 20% of the sludge and thereby reduce the volume and delay the need to provide additional storage. And then a final component of the study will be evaluating methods for future treatment of PFAS and other emerging contaminants. Next slide. The other facilities plan that we're working on currently is called our Heat and Power Facilities Plan. This one is a little ahead of the Biosolids project. It began in June of last year and is set to complete at the end of this year. This plan really looks at our biogas generation and our use of biogas. Beginning in the early 80s, we started using biogas to generate electricity. We have 3 large engines at the plant, 2 of which use the biogas as a fuel to generate electricity, and then 1 as a blower that provides air for the activated sludge process. The engines also put out a lot of heat, so we're able to recover that heat and use it to heat our hot water system, which then in turn is used for many processes at the plant, as long as building and heating cooling. So it's a very valuable system. It helps us offset a lot of energy costs from our local utility. But like the biosolids infrastructure, it is aging. It's been in use for several decades, and we need to reevaluate how we're doing things and how we're going to get use biogas for the next 20 years. Next slide. So here's a picture of one of those engine generators, and what we call aging assets. Again, they serve us very well, but they have been prone to failure in recent years. They have been rebuilt several times, some of them. And when that happens, obviously we can't use them to generate electricity. We have to flare the gas many times. And it also takes up time to maintain them. So what this study will do, next slide, please, is in process, but one thing we've already evaluated is basically the biogas facilities, how they're operating, what we would need to do to improve them. And at the same time, on a separate track, we're looking at the heating system. That work has been done, and now we're in the final stages where we're coming down the home stretch and looking how we're going to use our biogas in the future. One alternative is to keep doing what we're doing, basically generating our own heat and power, but only modernizing the equipment, doing it more efficiently. The other pathway is completely different. That would involve treating the gas to a higher standard, removing the impurities, and then selling it for resale, similar to what the Dane County landfill does. So we hope to have that answer by the end of the year. We don't have any of this infrastructure in our capital plan yet. We're waiting to see what the outcome is and how it interfaces with other projects, but more to come on that in the months to come. And with that, I will turn it over to Jen Hurlebus, and she's going to talk about collection system planning.
Thanks, Todd. Todd covered the facility planning efforts that we have at the treatment plant. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about the facility planning level and our process that we use for the collection system. So we'll start with capacity. About every 10 years, the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission helps provide population projections and other flow projections from other uses, like commercial, industrial customers in our service area. And that information, is based off of census data. So that's why we have that kind of 10-year evaluation process for that. So when we get that updated census data, the projections are then projected out even further. And then those numbers are used in usually 20-year increment time, 5-year periods in between that. So we take those flow projections and route them through the collection system and look at how the flows, and then applying a peaking factor for that more of wet weather event that can occur and cause higher flows in the system, and look at where we are starting to see some capacity concerns happening over those time periods in the system. And where capacity are identified, then those become recommended projects that we start planning for. So as Todd mentioned, that facility planning horizon is typically a 20-year, but then by looking in those 5-year increments, it starts helping us program them in the appropriate time in the CIP. Next slide. But as Todd alluded to, 2/3 of our CIP is actually being driven by condition. So this slide shows the length of sewer that was installed in each decade. A relatively rapid and steady rise in population occurred in the district service area between the years of 1954 and 1972. So that's why you see this significant increase in the length of interceptor system installed that occurred in the 1960s and 70s. And so that was to, provide sanitary service or extend it out to those growing communities, as a lot of that growth was in more of those outlying areas. And so, when we look at this graph, you want to keep in mind, the system was not installed at a steady pace. And we're looking at about 70% of that system is at or near its expected useful life based on age. So this creates a surge in the backlog of rehabilitation projects for several decades. While the expected useful life can inform planning, we utilize condition assessment data to prioritize projects. Next slide. So I'm going to kind of start with the overview of what this slide is. This is the end result, and then I'm going to step through all of the process in order to get this end result. So what this graph shows is a risk assessment for our gravity interceptors, and this helps inform that project prioritization. So what we're doing is we're taking a condition score, or the likelihood of failure on the left, or the y-axis, and we're plotting it with a consequence of failure. So, your condition is, I think, that's kind of what are we seeing as far as defects, and, is that pipe doing, or, kind of being maintained to the level that we would expect. And then your consequence of failure is taking in other criteria to kind of really complete that risk assessment. And so I'll get into the details, but just kind of the main takeaway of this is when we're plotting it, and then the colored zones, that's helping inform kind of the time frame of when we would want to address those concerns. So points in the red zone are considered like immediate needs with a very high risk of failure. The orange zone, we're looking at programming those into your CIP or a shorter time frame. Points in the yellow zone are what we're looking for in recommendation more on that facility planning window of about 20 years. So what are these points and how did we get there? So it starts with our annual televising and cleaning each year. We follow the national standard methodology for that. So it's putting a camera down the sewer pipe, and there's very specific methodology to what we call like defect or condition scoring. So the camera operator is taking that and looking and making sure that we can see the pipe, and then there's all sorts of different codes for actually that are to identify any defects in that pipe. We utilize a software that actually now is using artificial intelligence to do that scoring of the defects. This was a change in the last few years for us, and that provides consistency amongst those scores so that we can better compare the whole entire system. Because our goal is to televise at least 10% of the system each year. So you're looking at data that could be on a 10-year time frame. So at least having that consistency in the scoring helps us to look at this more on an equal basis. So once we get the defects coded, it generates a condition score. So that's that likelihood of failure score on your left. And that's on a range from 1 to 6. And that is done for every pipe in the system. And so in general, a condition score of 4 or greater requires attention. So that's where you see that yellow zone starting to happen at 4 on the y-axis. But we don't plot every pipe on this risk matrix. We have over 1,500 individual pipe segments. That's challenging to just plot. So what we did is we grouped pipes of similar diameter, age, material, and basically in that interceptor system. And that starts giving us a smaller data set to work with and helps us identify potential projects. So if condition was the only criteria, we would have about, just looking at this, of anything that's above a 4, that identified 10 interceptor projects that fall into that range. But we also want to look at the consequence of failure for that pipe to provide a risk assessment. So consequence of failure is also on a scale of 1 to 6. And some of the criteria that we included in that include pipe size, location, like if it's underneath a highway or maybe an airport runway, proximity to environmentally sensitive areas. Obviously, there's, other risk factors with, say, a river crossing, if that pipe were to fail. We also look at service to customers of significant importance, such as schools or hospitals. And the final criteria that we use into that calculation is access for maintenance, or if in an emergency, if that pipe were to fail, is how challenging would it be to get to that. So when we include that consequence of failure, that brings about, that adds 17 more projects that were identified into that yellow zone. So by kind of correlating back to that length of pipe from the age slide as well, we have then 1% of the gravity system that is falling in that orange zone and needs to be programmed in this, or more of the immediate time frame. And then we have 34% that falls by length and that falls into that yellow zone. So that's indicating our recommended projects over this within this 20-year facility planning timeframe. So I should also note, with that annual TV and clean process, then we're updating this condition assessment with the new information that we get from that work. So as rehabilitation projects are completed, those interceptors move down to the green zones, and other interceptors with deteriorating condition scores will move into the yellow or the orange zones. So again, repeating this process, updating it each year to incorporate into our CIP planning. Next slide. So when we're talking about rehabilitation or addressing these concerns, the most common method we'll often return, we talk about it as lining. So the 2025 CIP had 8 lining projects included for a total estimated cost of $20.5 million over that time frame. 2 of those projects are being completed this year. One already has been, and one's already in construction. So that's great. And the remaining 6 projects, and as I said, there's a few more that will get added as part of our updated assessment process. So lining a sewer is more cost effective. It really involves just putting a new pipe inside the existing pipe. It's done trenchless, meaning we're not digging to complete that work. And we, as you would, going back to that age of the interceptor system, and I noted that lumpiness. So we recognize that we will need to increase our rate of rehabilitation to keep up with the age of the system. Next slide. So I've talked a lot about the condition scores and the risk ranking in general terms. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight a couple of examples and explain why age is not our only criteria to use to select these projects. So from left to right, we're going in age of oldest to newer. So far left, our West Interceptor Babcock to Dayton project that's included in the CIP. That pipe was installed in 1916. And it's a 24-inch cast iron pipe. So cast iron, as it deteriorates, you get this corrosion that happens on the surface. So it kind of looks like rust. And that kind of, you end up, those kind of sheets start thinning. And so you end up with wall loss. And so a failure is often then, once that thickness is gone, you will, get holes in the pipe. So yes, here's an example of infrastructure that we have that is over 100 years old and is on the list to be rehabilitated, but has not been completed yet. So just tying it back to that risk gate matrix, In this case, the condition score is 5 out of 6. So very much in that we need to address zone. But when you consider some of the consequence of failure and then do an ordinal ranking, that is falling as ranked as 10. Moving to the middle, here's an example of a concrete pipe put in 1948. We are starting to see the actual rebar exposed. And this video is actually already 9 years old. It's getting televised again this year. But once you start seeing that exposed rebar, it is something that you definitely want to get on the list to address. And then to the right, here's an example too, where, concrete pipe installed in 1969, but has had a little bit more corrosion based, than maybe what its age would indicate. And you're starting to see infiltration at the joints, which we've noted in a couple of our recent emergency repair projects has been much more indicative of pipe failure than we had maybe thought of in the past. So those are, you're getting close to that 5 number, but the consequence of failure is high based on where it's located. And so that the Northeast Interceptor Tracks extension actually ranks second as the highest priority. Next slide. And so once we've identified these projects, this is just a few pictures of actual lining projects that we've done. And similar, you have a different range of pipe diameter. So the projects are not all the same, I guess is my main takeaway here. So the left is a small 12-inch diameter pipe. That's the project that was completed a couple of months ago. Pretty easy, it's not involving a huge crane like you see to the right. So that was a 48-inch concrete pipe up by the airport, required night work, large truck bed to bring in the liner, crane to lift it, bypassing system was very large. So, when we talk about lining projects as a group, they're not all the same. The costs aren't going to be the same. The level of effort, the challenges that you're facing can vary greatly. So I'm going to transition, I think, over to Lisa, and just a tie-in for her. I had mentioned the Northeast Interceptor was number 2 ranking. The number 1 worst ranking interceptor that we have based on condition is the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor System. But it also has capacity. So Lisa is going to talk about the capacity project.
Great. Thank you, Jen. That is an excellent transition. A lot of the things Jen was just talking about come into play with this project. So again, I'm Lisa Coleman. I'm the Director of Engineering. I'm going to talk about a few projects we have coming up. So the first of these is actually 2 projects that we're working on. So 2 phases of the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor. And we are currently working on design for both of those phases. And why is this project important? Well, Todd was talking earlier about the fast growth in the area. And this particular interceptor serves a fast-growing area in the southwestern and western portions of the district service area. And this particular interceptor is about 6 miles of pipe, varying sizes, but it carries wastewater to the plant from a population of about 84,000 people. So I believe that number is from the 2020 census. So, that is a lot of people that are very critical infrastructure for supporting communities and businesses down in that area. So the original pipe was installed around 1965, and we know that various parts of the interceptor are reaching capacity between essentially now and 2040 due to population growth. So the first phase of the project, phase 1, addresses the part of the project that needs capacity first. Needs capacity upgrades first. However, last year we had an emergency repair situation in what was intended to be the second phase. And we saw some very concerning condition defects as part of that repair. And so we've also begun simultaneously working on that second phase. So we may actually end up constructing phase 2 before phase 1. So we'll see who wins the race on that. But again, working on design for both of those projects right now. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so here's a map to kind of give you an overview of the areas. You can see on the map, up at the top is the belt line. So this is the area south of the belt line. Over to the left is Highway 18151 Verona Road. And then over to the right is Highway 14. And then you can see our interceptor kind of stretching in the colors there between those areas. So kind of down in the Fitchburg area south of the belt line. And so the first phase, phase 1, is shown in yellow on the map. And that is just upstream of pump station 11, which is on Larson Road. So you can see an arrow pointing at the yellow part. So that's the part we're planning to construct for phase 1. However, in order to design phase 1, we have to take a holistic look at the whole corridor to answer questions about route, right? Will we keep a similar route to where we're at now? Will we be able to just rehabilitate the existing pipe and then add a second pipe, or add a larger pipe in a slightly different location? Or those are the sort of questions we need to explore on sort of a holistic basis before we dial in on the design for phase 1. So this is a challenging project, considering that there's already obviously existing connections to the pipe. So, we can't just pick it up and relocate it somewhere else. We have to deal with the development that's around the pipe and connected to the pipe already. There are extensive wetlands through the corridor, which currently provide some access challenges for us. There is an environmental corridor along the existing pipe that obviously we require, care for dealing with working through that area. So lots of questions and evaluations that we're looking at right now in order to look at the whole corridor as well as come to design for phase 1. And then for phase 2, to orient you there, if you look to the far left in the map, you'll see a little orange breach. It's adjacent to Highway 18151, just upstream of our pump station 12, which is on Fitch-Rona Road. In this particular reach of pipe, this is an area where we had to complete an emergency repair last year. And in the course of doing so, we saw that the joints on the existing concrete pipe are in very poor condition. So if you see the pictures on the bottom of the slide, those are some of what we saw when we were working on this emergency repair. So you can see rebar visible on the outside of the pipe at the joints, which is not a good situation. So we are working on upsizing and replacing that pipe as soon as possible. So in the course of designing that one. Okay, so that's Nine Springs Valley. Next slide, please. All right, the next project I wanted to talk about is a project at the plant, the W4 project. So this is not in terms of comparison costs with some of our other projects, this is a relatively lower cost project, but we wanted to highlight it because it's important to point out that this one kind of illustrates that you have to spend money in order to save money. So what is this project? The W4 system is a existing system at the plant that needs to be replaced, reaching the end of its life. And what the system does is it allows us to use treated effluent that we've treated at the plant for various non-drinking water uses in the plant. So we use the W4 water as a wash water for several things, including our screening system and headworks, for wash water for the gravity belt thickeners, for cooling sludge storage, even for flushing some toilets in the plant, among other things. So using treated effluent in this way allows us to avoid buying about 300 million gallons of city water annually. And it allows us to avoid spending about $2 million in purchasing city water costs annually. So by replacing this system and allowing us to continue to use this system, we continue to be able to avoid additional costs. So how does the system work? In order to make the W4 water, we strain and chlorinate effluent. We currently have 2 chlorination systems, and with the project, we will consolidate those 2 treatment systems into a single system. So you can see here on the slide a little bit of pictures of some of the equipment that's related to the project that we're going to be replacing. So we'll replace pumps, strainers, controls, some piping in the system. And we're also going to replace the liquid chlorine dosing equipment, which includes liquid sodium hypochlorite storage tanks. That's the one in the upper right is what those storage tanks look like. Those are in our Headworks building. And as I mentioned, we currently have a second chlorine dosing system that's in our struvite harvesting building. That system is a slightly different system. It's a dry calcium hypochlorite briquette system. That system has presented maintenance challenges over the years. So we are planning to remove that system and then just have the liquid sodium hypochlorite system in Headworks. And then in order to do that and go down to the single system, that will require us adding in a new piping connection, which we're also planning to include with the project. So this project is currently in design. We're hoping to bid it probably late in the summer or early fall. All right, next slide, please. All right, last project that I'm going to talk about before I hand it off is the Lagoon Dikes project. And why is this project important? This project is a little unique. It's a resiliency project, and it is intended to prevent flooding of Lagoon 2. So Lagoon 2 is across Moreland Road from the plant. And why don't we want Lagoon 2 to flood? Well, we don't want Lagoon 2 to flood because it's a closed Superfund site. So we're obligated to maintain the integrity of that Superfund site. And ultimately, this project then is about protecting Nine Springs Creek, the adjacent waterway, and also preventing the release of PCB-containing materials out into the environment. So this project was precipitated by the regional flooding that occurred in 2018. So many folks remember that year. And at that time, the dike surrounding Lagoon 2 was nearly overtopped. So it didn't overtop and nothing bad happened, but we would like to prevent a close call like that from happening during future flooding events. All right, next slide, please. So just a quick history of the lagoons here, very brief history. I think it was mentioned earlier that biosolids were stored in the lagoons until about the 1970s when our Metro program began. Then in the 1980s, it was discovered that some of the biosolids in the lagoons had contained PCBs. And so in 1990, the site was placed on the EPA's National Priority List, which is another word for Superfund, basically. And then throughout the 90s, the lagoons were cleaned out and closed. And then in the early 2000s, an engineered cover was installed over remaining PCB containing materials in the lagoons. And then everything, was monitored and watched and nothing happened until about 2018 or roughly in 2018 when the regional flooding occurred. And then it became clear that those berms surrounding the lagoons perhaps are not high enough. So following that, we added this project into the CIP. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so what are we planning to do with this project? This is a project that sounds simple, but is actually kind of complex. It sounds simple to just raise the dikes a little higher, but the challenge here is that there are very soft soils below the dikes. And it has been a challenge to come up with a design that is constructible with lightweight equipment and gives us enough height on those berms without adding too much weight. We don't want to add too much weight because we don't want to cause even more settlement to those berms. So that is kind of the technical challenge with the site. There is also permitting challenges with the site. So permitting for the site is complex because of the presence of wetlands, waterways surrounding the area, a floodplain that we are within. We have to deal with federal requirements for the Superfund program, et cetera, et cetera. So we have been working on permitting with Dane County, DNR, EPA, Army Corps, among others. So very complex permitting for this site. We've finally settled on a design that is constructible and permittable, and it includes 2 different designs for different areas around the lagoons. So for the south berm of Lagoon 2, which is it's circled on that the map to the bottom of the slide on the left along Nine Springs Creek. In that area, our plan is to build a vinyl sheet pile wall. And that there's a rendering in the upper right of the slide that shows sort of what that would look like. So that will allow us to add a couple of feet of height to the berm without adding additional weight essentially to the berm. And that sort of shows what that's going to look like, the rendering there. So that is a unique solution along the south berm where the geotechnical conditions are the worst, frankly. The rest of the berm around the lagoon, which is the north berm and the east berms, that we are able to raise with a more conventional method of using lightweight fill, which will be a mix of soil and wood chips to build up the height of that berm. So we're planning to build the sheet pile wall portion in 2026 along the South Dike, and then the other portions in 2027. So and just so you know what the picture to the lower right, that is in 2018 during the flooding, and you can see Nine Springs Creek is on the right. It is not overtopping those berms, but it was pretty close. So, okay, and with that, I will hand it off. I believe Alan Grooms is up next.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Yes, Alan Grooms. I'm the operations manager for the Madison Metropolitan Sewage District, and I'm going to talk about a couple of projects we've got going. This one is one of the bigger projects we've currently got going. This is liquid processing improvements phase 2, and this project, the stating that we've got multiple phases. We recently completed phase 1 of what we called liquid processing improvements, and that was focused on the hydraulics of getting higher flows to the plant. We were really looking at high flows from like a storm event or something like that, where we might see, we typically handle about 40 million gallons a day, give or take. We're talking about how do we get flows like 180 million gallons a day through the plant. That point, you're not focused on treatment, you're focused on getting everything through the plant and getting basic treatment and not spilling is what it really comes down to. So that project was recently completed. That's given us the capacity to handle the hydraulics, but what has not been addressed on that is the load that comes with that and the day-to-day load that comes with that. And that's really what this project is primarily focused on: capacity. There's also an element of replacing outdated equipment. So as Todd noted earlier, gave you some good graphics there. The region is growing quite at a good pace. So in order to allow communities to grow and develop and bring industries and businesses to town in the, when those opportunities come up and they don't have to turn people away or turn opportunities away, that we have to have capacity to make that treatment in order to take the load that comes associated with that. Once that's conveyed to us by the collection system, we have to treat it and then return it safely to the environment. And we have a regulating permit, what we call a WPDS permit, Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. And it's basically what it does is it tells us what our numbers have to be at or below in order to meet our requirements to return the water back to the environment. And so when we're looking at that, we look at the projections, what the average loadings are per day, what the future loadings are going to look like. And that is one of the big flags we're getting on this. I mentioned on this slide the CMAR scores. That's an annual report. Every wastewater plant in the state does it. It's a compliance maintenance annual report. And what that does is takes a look at what kind of loadings you're getting to the plant on a daily basis, weekly, monthly basis, and assigns those scores. It looks at how many violations did you have, or did you have violations where you exceeded your permit. But it also looks at things like how many days, how many months did you average more than 90% of your design flow? How many months did you exceed 100% of what you're rated for? And looking at those in the last few years, we've seen those scores start to drop a little bit. We've got a fairly conservatively designed plant, and a lot of good fortune and good management. I think over the years, we've had good scores. We're kind of used to that. But the last few years, we've seen those scores start to take a dip. And the score itself isn't a problem. We have been treating and meeting and exceeding what we have to treat to for return of a wastewater, return that water back to the environment. But what we're seeing on that are the scores would tend to say on the rating system the DNR has would say you need to do planning for an upgrade, or you need to have a project in process. Well, guess what? That's what this project is. So this is what we're working on in order to address those needs as they're developing. And so that's a big part of what this project is required to do. We are in the final design phase of this project right now. We are anticipating a bid approximately May of next year. That could vary a little bit depending on the final design timing and the bid climate. The cost is fairly substantial on this. And the other part of this, though, that we expect to get from it, we've got, we're always looking at our energy. What costs can we control? What costs, we can't control what load comes to us. I'm fond of telling people we have to treat whatever comes to us. We have to treat it. The part that we can do influence a little bit is, how efficient are we? Are we spending a lot on power? And there's obviously newer equipment, newer technology is more energy efficient. You get more out of a kilowatt, for example. But sometimes those projects aren't no-brainers. Sometimes it's like, well, it doesn't pay for me to buy that upgraded motor or that upgraded piece of equipment right now because the equipment I've got is still good. And so, but when you make that change and it comes a time like this where we do have to make an upgrade, that's the opportunity where you can cost effectively make that upgrade. So those are the kind of things we're looking at with this project. Next slide, please. So this is showing a little bit of the behind the scenes, what we looked at with evaluating what our needs would be for phase 2. So as Todd mentioned earlier in the presentation, we're working off typical facilities planning window is about 20 years. That kind of gets out. You can do a 50-year master plan. You can try and guess what things look like in 50 years, and you might get it pretty close. But 20 years is generally accepted window for planning an actual project because that starts to get out to the limits of what you can, you get beyond that, it starts getting harder to forecast accurately. You may overshoot or undershoot how much capacity you have. And so that's kind of the generally accepted planning window. So we were estimating this project would come online about 2030. And so we have a planning window that goes out to 2050. And you look here, the population area in 2020, when we started this process for this, was 408,000 people in the service area. And we're looking at 2050, that's going to be up to 558,000. That's the forecast value. Similarly, our plant flows are estimated to go from about 40 to 43 MGD that we were in 2022 up to approximately 57 in 2050. And so you can see that we had some, the orange and the blue and the red plots. Those are BOD and solids. BOD is biochemical oxygen demand. It's basically a measure of the organic loading coming to the plant. Solids is obvious, and then the TP is the phosphorus. And you see that kind of dip down. There are a number of things that influence that, including maybe we had a couple of large businesses that moved their operations out of the Madison area that maybe bought us some additional time. We also saw things like the phosphorus regulations where detergents came, phosphorus came out of detergents and things like that. And so those measures there, we see that kind of dip going from about 2005 to about 2017. But you'll notice the green line in particular stands out on this. That's our total Kaldol nitrogen, and that's basically a measure of how much nitrogen load is coming to the plant. And that's been on a fairly steady climb. And then the dashed lines on all of these are what we're projecting out to 2050. And you can see those are all expected to increase as the population grows, as new businesses and industries come to the area. And so loadings is really the central part of what's driving this project. But as you mentioned, a lot of the equipment we have is a little bit older. The last time we did liquid, I mentioned a 20-year planning window, but the last time we did liquid processing improvements to the plant, the Nine Springs facility, the major work was done in 1985 timeframe with some modifications done in 1998. So we're talking 30 to 40 years run we've gotten out of this equipment. So some of that is some loads that have come out of the area, as I mentioned, but other parts of that is just conservative design and good maintenance and operating practices that things have kept running that long. So next slide, please. So it's this kind of gets more into the what we're doing with this project, why what's going to be in this. And so we use the term hybrid BNR, biological nutrient removal system. So what we're doing with this process, we are required to treat the biochemical oxygen demand, or the BOD, is a commonly accepted measure of how much carbon loading is coming to the plant. We also have nitrogen that demands air, and then phosphorus. We are able to meet our phosphorus limits also with the biology in the plant. So we basically construct these plants in these big tanks, very specific designs in order to manage and achieve those levels of treatment that we need to achieve in order to meet our permit. The good news is with this process, we actually were able to do this without adding additional structures or tanks, with the exception of a post-aeration tank, and I'll explain that a little bit. What we're doing with this hybrid system, we have been researching for a number of years what we call low dissolved oxygen operations, and that's running at a lower dissolved oxygen level in the tanks to get different microbiology to do work concurrently. So it's working at the same time to do multiple things. And our research has indicated there's a lot of potential with this. There's other plants that are doing this work as well, scattered through the country. And so we feel like this has got really good potential. And so we're setting up in order to operate in that manner, but I refer to it as a hybrid system because we also have as a backup plan to come back and be able to operate exactly as we're doing now. So if we get into this and it doesn't, for whatever reason, it doesn't appear to work for us, we can always step back and do that. And by using that hybrid approach, we were able to skip a step that would have cost more money and taken a few years, a piloting step that would have taken some additional time. So we were able to kind of move straight to design with this process. Things we're looking at in the red shaded areas. So to orientate you, this is an overview of the Nine Springs plant on the graphic there. The top of the screen is looking generally north. And so the red areas are our aeration tanks. And some of these, the smaller, kind of in the middle there, the smaller ones, they date back to they're part of the original plant in the 1930s. The plant grew to the east, and then the newest part of the plant is on the west side. So the right-hand side is east, the left-hand side is west. And so what we're looking at that is we're replacing the diffusers and aeration grids, which the current ones we have are from the mid 80s. So those are about 40 years old. We're also replacing some of the air piping that's gotten aged and deteriorated. We also have 2 blower buildings on site, and looking at that, we looked at consolidating the operations, but what we elected to do was keep those separated for a couple of reasons. Because they already existed and we could use the existing building, we didn't have to spend to build a new building. We could fit the blowers we're proposing for the project into those, but by keeping 2 blowers buildings separate and cross-connecting them, we're able to also build in some additional resiliency. So say we had a fire in one of these buildings or something happened, or we needed to do construction, take one of them out temporarily, we could service the plant with one or the other buildings with that cross connect. So that gives us some flexibility and some additional resiliency. It isn't necessarily something, if we were doing this from scratch, that you would do, but since we already have the buildings in place, the infrastructure is largely there, we could do this with no essentially no additional cost. We'll also be doing additional instrumentation and controls that'll have to go into the system, rehabilitating some older primary tanks, they're in the yellow, and changing some of the channel aeration. And then I mentioned that post aeration tank. That will be the new structure that we're planning on building. That structure will be, it's the blue structure up by the effluent building. If we're running a lower dissolved oxygen fraction, we do have a dissolved oxygen requirement to go out to the discharge point. And so that lower dissolved oxygen coming to us will mean that, or coming out of the plant means we have to boost that just a little bit. Doing that with a post aeration tank is a lot more space and cost efficient to do. The big news is we do not need additional primary tanks. We don't need to build plant 5. The bad news for those that are really young on the call, 2050, we'll probably will have to break ground on plant 5, but that's a long ways down the planning horizon. Next slide, please. And then a few things we're doing as far as technology. I kind of brushed over some of these, but we're looking at integrating the blowers. We're looking at trying to use the same type of blowers. We've got kind of a mix of blowers we have right now, including, I mentioned aging infrastructure. We've got a couple of our mainline blowers are from 1962. So I don't know how many people on this call are older than that, but those are older than me. So they're still doing good mainline service, but it gets harder to maintain and get parts for units that are that old. And you can imagine the motors on those aren't as energy efficient as what you can get today. So the high-speed turbo blowers are basically like a standard centrifugal blower, but they a lot more energy efficient. They run on a magnetic bearing to reduce friction and reduce that energy, those parasitic losses. And so they just turn at a really high RPM and push out air, a smaller unit to put out the same amount of air. We're estimating with this low DO process we're talking about using, that could reduce our energy purchase about 18% by using that biological process. And we think we can get as good or even better effluent coming out of the plant with less energy input. So we're pretty excited about it. Even if that doesn't work, that fallback plan I talked about, we still think we'll get about 7 to 11% energy reduction just with some of the more modern equipment, more energy efficiency. The blower configuration, I mentioned the cross connection and what that will allow us to do. We are also peeling off some of the, I'll call them parasitic loads. They're necessary loads to do mixing in some of our channels, but they don't demand that high volume or high pressure that the main aeration system does. So we're separating that out into systems that are appropriately sized and configured in order to do that more efficiently without a lot of wasted energy there. And then the other thing we're moving to, we made a selection to go to what we call silicone tube membrane diffusers. And it's basically a fine bubble diffuser, but there should put out a very, it's just a way of bubbling air into the tanks, but it should be even more energy efficient than the system we have now. So next slide. And I'll move on to a different project now. This one is a improvement to a process we've already got, Ostara nutrient recovery system. And what that does is struvite harvesting. And so struvite might not be a term that's familiar to very many of you, but with the hard water, particularly high in magnesium here in the Madison area and anaerobic digestion that we have, we get a lot of magnesium in the water, the ammonia, and then the phosphorus that comes from the biological phosphorus removal. All those have combined, and our plant has really struggled, and many others have as well, with a nuisance chemical precipitate of phosphorus that's referred to as struvite. And it basically, in the solids handling system that I know that we talked about earlier in the system, the biosolids portion, the the struvite will tend to precipitate out and form nuisance deposits that waste energy, waste capacity, and require physical removing in many cases, chipping and breaking, opening up pipes and chipping that out to remove that. Represents a lot of labor and cost in order to keep the system running with that. We've struggled with it with many years on how to control that. We ended up putting in the 11th edition of Nine Springs, which went online in 2013, 2014. We put in a struvite recovery system to remove some of that phosphorus from our solid stream before it goes to digestion. And that has improved dramatically the issues we have there. So we've reduced the cost in maintaining and keeping that system operating, the solids handling process. And what this system does then is takes that phosphorus out, and it creates a slow release fertilizer that is valuable in the ag fertilizer market as a slow release phosphorus containing fertilizer, particularly attractive for sandier soils is my understanding. So a lot of it, my understanding, goes to the Dakotas, to sugar beet farming, potato farming, that sort of thing. Never mind that, it basically relieves a problem for us and creates a revenue stream. The system we put in was one of the first generation systems we had. And so that in running that system for a few years, we've discovered there's, as we've learned more about it, the throughput and capacity needs have increased on that system. And also the service that the dryers in particular have been in have led to a degraded condition. So the dryers are in need of upgrading, both for capacity and for asset condition. But we also have seating that needs improvement, and then the DAF, dissolved air flotation unit, and I'll get into those in subsequent slides. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the dryer and the seating improvements. So for the dryers, the physical condition of these dryers has deteriorated. They require a lot of, that comes in with a wet slurry of product. That wet environment and the cleaning means that we had to have to use on that. And some of the early dryers, quite honestly, weren't configured the best to allow maintenance. And so that's led to a lot of improvising and improvements that we've had to do on the fly. And as the material condition those, it's a pretty harsh service. So those have degraded. The other part is the capacity and the efficiency of those units that are available now are much better. So we feel like the time has come to look at making those improvements that would improve the production efficiency and the throughput. And it would also get the allow us to do a upgrade the capacity on those. The seating aspect of this project is the initial system we put in, it was thought that the seating would be a really infrequent operation. Like I said, this was one of the original systems that went in. It's since been learned that we need to do fairly regular seating on these systems. And so the system that we have is actually pretty inadequate and it's really inefficient. And there are some safety concerns with it. So what we're looking at is saving labor and energy with getting the dryers replaced, addressing that deteriorating condition, and then addressing the issues of the seating system. That project, we're preparing to issue an RFP for the design services on that. That we're thinking will be out in the next month or so, and we're hoping to bid that by next year. So next slide, please. And then the DAF rehabilitation, I mentioned the dissolved air flotation. That system was originally installed in 1987. And so that was originally how we thickened our waste activated sludge at the site. That was planned to be taken out in 2013 when the 11th edition went into service. But as I said, the Ostara system was a fairly new process at the time. Over the years, we did a lot of things to save money, and they were pretty clever innovations over the years to transfer sludge and skimmings and things like that around the site by combining pipes rather than laying new pipes. The downside to that when we put the Ostara process on is there was a lot of extra water contained in that was detrimental to that process. And in quickly thinking how we could address that, the realization that we had this DAF that had just been shut down that we could probably get to make work. And so we piped it up and it did indeed work. And so that was, instead of being retired and taken out of service, it was pressed immediately back into service and has been serving continuously since 2013. So 1987 to present day, the exact nature of what it's doing has changed slightly, but essentially that process has continued to operate. And it's a system that at this point needs some addressing. The material condition is down because it was not planned to serve this long. And so we're looking at a project here, and this one's a little ways out. This one we're looking for planning services in mid 2026. The thought is that the DAF, is that the correct technology we want to do? And if it is, then we would be looking at a full rehabilitation of this system. It's also possible we may look at replacement of this system, so with something else. And so we don't know what that study will come up with, but that's what the purpose of this project is. That's a little bit farther out in the CIP horizon, but this is kind of covering a gamut of things. So next slide. I think I'll be turning this over to Eric Rear. So.
All right, thanks, Alan. I'm Eric Rear, Maintenance and Reliability Manager for the district. And I'll be talking about two relatively smaller collection system projects compared to what Alan just talked about. But first off, I'll be talking about our Crosstown Force Main Saddle Tap Replacement Project. The Crosstown Force Main that was constructed in 2002. It's a vital piece of infrastructure that connects our Pump Station 1 to our Pump Station 2. It's a 30-inch diameter pipe, stretches approximately 3.5 miles down the isthmus. Pump Station 1 is located at First Street. Pump Station 2 is located at Birmingham Park, so basically right down the isthmus. That's how those are connected. Under our normal operating mode, Pump Station 1 is sending wastewater to Pump Station 2. From 2, it comes to the treatment plant. But under emergency situations or for maintenance needs, we can convey wastewater from Pump Station 2 to Pump Station 1. The project is really important because the risk of the saddle taps on this force main failing is rising, increasing the risk of sanitary sewer overflows in the downtown isthmus area. Next slide, please. So due to the topography of the isthmus and the existing utilities that needed to be crossed when the force main was installed, it had to be constructed with 21 intermediate high points. Each of these high points requires a manhole structure with a saddle tap and an combination air vacuum release valve. This allows any entrapped air to be evacuated from the force main. Just so everyone knows, a saddle tap is a clamp-on device that allows access to the force main in this case, basically at any point without the addition of a costly fitting. And the picture on the upper right is kind of the old setup with a saddle tap and a valve on top. The buildup of air in these high points drastically reduces the flow rate through the force main and the efficiency of the pumps, which results in higher energy costs to convey the wastewater. So that's why it's critical to get the air out of these high points when we're pumping wastewater between the two stations. You can see from the bottom picture, the original saddle taps, they're constructed of painted steel. In this case, it was painted blue. They've been subject to corrosion in the moist manhole environments. These manholes will get seasonal groundwater in them at times, so we're constantly pumping them out to maintain, dryness, but water does seep through. Also, the original saddle taps, you notice, are also fairly narrow. They basically encompass the opening into the force main, so they're barely covering that. Just note that for the new saddle taps I show you. And the valves used to isolate the air, the valves on top of the saddle tap used to isolate the air vacuum release valves are a gate valve. And you can see with that hand wheel on the top pictures, basically you got to turn that hand wheel probably 20 times to get that valve closed. And those are also made out of a cast iron. So those did not fare very well in the moist environment. And staff found those valves very difficult to operate, especially by the positioning of the hand wheel next to the wall. Let's see, next slide. In 2024, We budgeted a project to replace 5 of the saddle taps that were in the worst condition along the crosstown force main. These were deemed to be in the worst condition using our condition assessment tool that we annual condition assessments of our manholes by our collection system services group. So you can see the picture on the left there. That's the new saddle tap setup. You can see it's much wider, encompasses more of the opening or covers more of the pipe further away from the opening, so much safer to use. They're made of stainless steel in this case, so they're corrosion resistant. Let's see. The new isolation valves are a plug valve and a quarter turn plug valve. So in lieu of turning the valve 20 times to close it, basically the operators or the workers need to turn that handle about 90 degrees or 45 degrees and the valve is closed. So much easier, much safer for them to operate. So in 2026, the remaining 16 saddle taps are going to be replaced basically in the same manner. Stainless steel saddle taps and quarter turn isolation valves. The other 16, they may not be in the porous condition as poor of a condition the 5 were replaced, but our maintenance philosophy here at the district is reliability centered maintenance. So we look to repair and replace infrastructure before it fails so we can adequately plan and budget for it. So in this case, future is going to say these are going to eventually get worse and fail. So we're doing this now while we have proper budget and planning. Next slide. Okay, second project for me is the pumping station bar screens. To start with this project, basically I got to go to the headworks building at the treatment plant. So the headworks building at the plant was constructed in 2005 during the 10th edition. That building receives wastewater from 5 of the regional pump stations. During that project, we installed 3 rotating band screens as a method of screening wastewater in the headworks. These are a type of finer screen, very small holes. Their function is to remove finer debris from the wastewater. Band screen manufacturers recommend a coarse screening prior to the equipment to prevent damage and reduce maintenance. But currently, there's no coarse screening implemented ahead of these finer screens, except at Pump Station 18, which is our newest pump station. Coarse screens, the spacing is typically 1-inch bars, so they remove large items such as rags, trash, and other debris that's 1 inch larger in size. So under this project, the remaining 4 pump stations that come to the treatment plant will receive bar screens to provide the necessary coarse screening ahead of the band screens. So this would include pump stations 2, 7, 8, and 11. And just for reference, a bar screen, these bar screens are self-raking devices. They run on a differential level indicator. So once debris builds up onto the bar screen, there's a series of rakes that go down under the waste stream, rake waste up into the bar screen through its compactor. And those screenings that come off the bar screen are basically pushed into a dumpster for easy disposal and pickup. Next slide. So the 4 remaining pump stations that will receive the bar screens, they actually have existing screening channels in their wet wells that would be modified for installation of the new screens. This will really save us on cost and on time because the new screening channels do not need to be constructed in each of these pump stations. 3 of the 4 pump stations also have room in their wet well area to house a screenings dumpster, deferring any structural modifications to house those dumpsters. Pump station 7 is the only one that will need some modifications. And the picture on the right shows our screening set up at pump station 18. The bar screen is more or less the silver unit towards the center left of the in the picture there. And then the dumpster is on the right, and then you see the tubes going into the bags. That's the screenings basically being pushed from the screen compactor to the dumpster. Then our waste disposal just drives into the bay there, picks up the dumpster and dumps it, and they're on their way. So the new bar screens at the 4 remaining stations will have a similar setup. Pump station 18 is designed with 2 screens. The other stations will be just designed with 1 screen. and an emergency overflow channel. Just for reference as well, bar screens at pump station 18 remove approximately 1 ton of debris from the influent waste stream per week. The majority of that is, basically rags coming through, but they are removing a ton and saving that from coming to the treatment plant. And there's also other benefits to installing the bar screens, not just to protect the band screens at the headworks, but they also result in reduced pump plugging at the pump stations. They reduce damage to the pumps from larger debris being introduced into them. There's reduced maintenance costs associated with those two then. Then it prevents any ragging materials going downstream, causing more issues with the collection system. And that was all I had. I believe I'm going to turn it over to Bill Walker now.
Nope, you're actually turning it over to me, Eric. So this
Oh,
is
sorry
Amanda
about that.
That's okay. This is Amanda Wegner, the Communications and Public Affairs Director here at the district. So I'm just going to close this up here. So just a couple of upcoming dates on this slide that are of interest from a capital improvements plan CIP perspective. So we will be doing a preview or overview rather at our July 31st commission meeting of the 2026-2031, because it covers 6 years capital improvements plan. On August 6th, this is really for our customer communities. We are having a community budget preview meeting that has been in Eric's email the last few months, but invitation will be coming in another month or so. But if you want to hold the date, there it is. And then September and October is really when we are in full budget season mode. And we will present on September 11th, the proposed 26 operating capital projects and debt service budget. Again, that is at our commission meeting. And then on October 30th, is the review and adoption of those budgets. So just some dates to keep in mind for those commission meetings. Those are open to the public and they are live streamed. So if you cannot make those meetings on Thursdays at usually at 8 a.m., sometimes we delay the start to accommodate special meetings, but we do make those available on our YouTube channel, or you can watch them asynchronously. So just one more slide here before I let everyone back onto their day. So again, we are pretty close on time here. And if you have questions, as Eric said at the beginning, feel free to just reach out to us. You can email those to info@madsewer.org, and then we will take care to route those accordingly to this fabulous team of staff that we had presenting here today. This video will also be made available online for viewing by the end of the week. And we'll send out a link to all of the attendees as well as representatives from all of our customer communities. So with that, that brings us to the end of our very first CIP technical information webinar. Please do reach out. Let us know if you found it useful. We really do appreciate everyone who took the time to be on here with us today. And I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thank you so much.